This episode was produced using AI-generated voices and scripting. Okay, so here's what I keep coming back to. Everyone wants to talk about Nvidia losing the training market. The custom chip wars, the hyperscalers building their own silicon for training. That's the narrative. But the actual threat, the one that should make Jensen lose sleep, isn't training at all.
It's inference, and it's not even a future threat anymore. Google is actively in talks with Marvell to co-develop a custom inference chip, not training. Inference, that's the revenue stream Nvidia keeps telling Wall Street is their next growth engine.
Okay, but hang on. Google already has TPUs. They've been building their own AI chips for years. Why do they need Marvell?
That's actually the most interesting part of this whole thing. Google's TPUs are general-purpose AI accelerators. They do training, they do inference, they do a bit of everything. What Google apparently wants now is something purpose-built, optimized specifically for inference workloads. And Marvell's whole business model, their custom silicon ASIC business, is exactly that. They design chips to a customer's spec.
So Google's basically saying our own in-house chip isn't good enough for this one job.
No, that's not what's happening. It's more like inference at the scale Google operates is becoming its own category. The workload profile is completely different from training. Training is about raw compute throughput, just crunching numbers as fast as possible. Inference is about latency, power efficiency, cost per query. Every time someone asks Gemini a question, that's an inference call. Multiply that by hundreds of millions of users, and suddenly the economics of inference dominate everything.
That's the whole game right there. It's not about can you build a model, it's about can you serve it cheaply enough to not go bankrupt.
Exactly that. And this is where Nvidia's position gets structurally uncomfortable. Their GPUs are incredible for training. They're good for inference too, but they're over-provisioned for it. You're paying for all this training capability you don't need when you're just running inference. It's like buying a Formula One car to do your grocery run.
Expensive groceries.
Very expensive groceries. And Google, being Google, has done the math. If you can build a chip that's even, I don't know, 30 or 40% more efficient at inference at their scale, that's billions of dollars in savings annually. Billions.
So let me push back on this a little bit though. Marvel stock has been on a roller coaster. They've had a rough stretch. Is this Google throwing them a lifeline? Or is Marvell genuinely the best partner here?
Marvel's the real deal in custom silicon. They already do this for other hyperscalers. Amazon's been a major customer. The custom ASIC business at Marvell has been one of their strongest growth areas. And nobody's saying this, but Marvell has a design capability that's genuinely hard to replicate. You can't just spin up a custom chip design house overnight. Broadcom does it too, but the number of companies that can actually execute on this at the complexity level required for AI inference, it's basically 2, maybe 3 companies.
Wait, so this is also a capacity story? Like there aren't enough chip designers in the world to do this?
There really aren't. And that's part of why Google would go to Marvell rather than just expanding their internal TPU team. The talent bottleneck in custom silicon design it's severe. Google has a great TPU team, but building a fundamentally different architecture optimized for a different workload is almost like starting from scratch. Marvell's done this dozens of times.
Okay, here's my contrarian take on this whole thing. Everyone's framing this as bad for Nvidia, right? Google's defecting, building custom chips, the walls are closing in. But what if this is actually bad for Google?
Go on.
Custom silicon is a commitment. You're locking yourself into an architecture. AI is moving so fast. The models are changing every 6 months. What if Google spends 2-3 years co-developing this perfect inference chip with Marvell, and by the time it's in production, the inference workload looks completely different because the models have changed?
That's a really fair point. It's the same risk every custom chip effort faces. The development cycle for a custom ASIC is typically 18 months to 2 years minimum. In AI time, that's an eternity. The model architectures could shift. Mixture of experts, different attention mechanisms, who knows what's next.
Right. And NVIDIA's whole pitch is flexibility. Their GPUs are programmable. New model architecture comes along, you just write new software. Custom silicon doesn't have that luxury.
True, but here's the counter to that. Inference workloads are actually more stable than training workloads. Once you've trained a model, say Gemini 2.5, you're going to serve that model for months, maybe a year or more, while you train the next one. The inference profile of a deployed model doesn't change, so you could optimize silicon for it with much more confidence than you could for training.
Huh, that's a good distinction. So the custom chip doesn't need to be future-proof, it just needs to be perfect for today's model.
Perfect-ish. And then you iterate. You build the next version for the next model. Google's already on like their sixth generation of TPUs. They know how to do the iteration cycle.
Okay, but that brings up something else. If Google's going to Marvell for inference chips, what happens to the TPU program? Is this a replacement? A supplement? Are there internal politics here?
Oh, there are absolutely internal politics. There always are. The TPU team at Google has been one of the crown jewels of the hardware org. And now leadership is essentially saying, we also need this other thing that you don't make. That's a tough message to deliver internally.
Come on, it's Google. They've killed products people loved. An internal chip team getting their feelings hurt isn't going to.
It's not about feelings. It's about resource allocation. Every dollar and every engineer that goes to the Marvel partnership is a dollar and an engineer that doesn't go to TPU development. And at some point, someone at Google has to decide, are TPUs the future or are purpose-built custom ASICs the future? Or both. And both is the most expensive answer.
Who does that actually help? Like, if I'm a Google Cloud customer, do I care whether my inference is running on a TPU or a Marvel designed ASIC?
You care about cost and latency. That's it. And if the Marvel chip delivers better cost per inference and lower latency, then yeah, you benefit. But you probably never know what chip it's running on. Google abstracts that away.
So this is really an internal cost optimization play dressed up as a strategic silicon move.
Partially, but it's also a signal. When the biggest AI company in the world, and I'd argue Google is still the biggest when you count infrastructure, models, search, cloud, the whole stack, when that company decides it needs a fundamentally different chip architecture for inference, that tells the whole industry something.
What does it tell them?
That inference is not a solved problem. That NVIDIA's H100s and B200s, great as they are not the optimal answer. And that there's a massive market for inference-specific silicon that doesn't exist yet at scale.
Okay, let me throw something else out there. You mentioned Amazon earlier. They've been working with Marvell. They have their own Trainium and Inferentia chips. Microsoft has Maya. Meta's building custom silicon. Google has TPUs, and now this Marvell thing. At what point do we just say Nvidia's data center business is in real trouble?
Not yet. And this is the part that frustrates me about how people cover this. NVIDIA's data center revenue last quarter was, the actual number is something like $27 billion in a single quarter. These custom chip programs from the hyperscalers are not replacing that overnight, not replacing it in 5 years. What they're doing is capping the growth.
Capping, not cutting.
Right. NVIDIA was on a trajectory where every new AI workload meant more GPU purchases. What these custom chip programs do is say, okay, for inference specifically, we're going to gradually bring that in-house or use custom silicon. The training market, NVIDIA still owns that. Nobody's seriously challenging them on frontier model training, but inference is where the volume is.
And the volume is only growing. Every AI feature, every chatbot, every search query with AI, that's all inference.
Exactly. Some estimates have inference eventually being 70–80% of total AI compute spending. If the hyperscalers can claw back even a fraction of that with custom silicon, the dollar amounts are enormous.
Okay, but you said something earlier that I want to come back to. You said Nvidia's GPUs are over-provisioned for inference, like buying a Formula One car for groceries. But Nvidia's not stupid. They've been pushing inference optimizations. TensorRT, all the software stack stuff. Are they just going to let this market walk away?
No, and they won't. NVIDIA's already pivoting. They've been talking about inference performance improvements with every new architecture. The GB200, the Blackwell platform, a lot of the marketing has shifted to inference throughput, inference efficiency. Jensen knows where the puck is going.
So it's a race.
It's a race, but it's a race where NVIDIA has a fundamental disadvantage because they sell general-purpose GPUs. By definition, a custom chip designed for one workload at one company will be more efficient at that specific workload than a general-purpose chip. That's just physics and economics.
Unless Nvidia starts doing custom silicon too. Which, is that even possible for them?
It would destroy their business model. NVIDIA's margins come from designing one chip and selling millions of them. Custom silicon is the opposite. You design a unique chip for each customer. NVIDIA's gross margins are in the 75% range. Custom ASIC margins are way lower. Marvell's operating in the 40s, 50s. Nvidia would never cannibalize itself like that.
Wait, seriously? That margin gap is that big?
It's massive. And it's why this dynamic is so interesting. Nvidia can't compete on the axis that matters here, bespoke efficiency, without becoming a fundamentally different company. And the hyperscalers know it.
That feels like the most important thing we've said. Nvidia's trapped by its own success.
Trapped is strong, but constrained, yeah. Their mode in training is deep. CUDA, the software ecosystem, the interconnects, the whole stack. But inference doesn't need most of that. Inference is simpler computationally. It's more about memory bandwidth, power efficiency, and cost per token. You don't need CUDA for that.
Okay, so let me flip this. Here's my other contrarian take. What if the real loser here isn't Nvidia? It's the other hyperscalers who aren't doing this. Like, if Google gets a custom inference chip that's significantly cheaper to run, and Microsoft doesn't,
But Microsoft does. They have Maya, and Amazon has Inferentia too, and Meta's building their own stuff. They're all doing it.
right? But are they all doing it at the same level? Google going to Marvell, that's a specific signal that they want something beyond what they can build internally. Are the others doing that?
Amazon's been working with Marvell for a while on custom silicon. Broadcom does similar work for other hyperscalers. There are reports about Google working with Broadcom too on different chips. So, yeah, most of the big players are pursuing this, but the pace is different. Google and Amazon are arguably furthest ahead. Microsoft's Maya is newer.
So, this is also a competitive dynamic story within the hyperscaler club.
Absolutely. And the scary thing for the smaller cloud providers, the Oracles, the IBMs, is that they can't do any of this. They don't have the scale to justify custom silicon. A custom chip program costs hundreds of millions of dollars in development alone. If you're not running inference at Google or Amazon scale, you can't amortize that.
Which means the big get bigger.
The big get more efficient, which is arguably worse for competitors. If Google can serve Gemini inference at half the cost per query compared to a smaller competitor running on Nvidia GPUs, that's an unassailable cost advantage.
Okay, hang on. You said earlier that custom chips take 18 months to 2 years. So this Google Marvel thing, even if the talks are happening now, we're talking about a chip that doesn't exist until 2027 at the earliest?
Probably. These things take time. Design, tape out, validation, manufacturing ramp, and that's assuming the talks progress smoothly, which, big company negotiations aren't exactly known for speed.
So why does this matter now? If the chip's years away, why is everyone losing their minds?
Because it's the direction, not the destination. Every quarter, more evidence piles up that the hyperscalers are serious about reducing NVIDIA dependence for inference. This Google Marvel report is another data point. And investors, they trade on direction. NVIDIA stock trades at like 50, 60 times earnings. Any threat to the growth narrative is existential for that multiple.
There it is. It's a valuation story, not a technology story.
It's both. But yeah, the market reaction's about the multiple. If inference, the fastest growing part of AI compute, starts migrating to custom silicon over the next 3 to 5 years, NVIDIA's total addressable market shrinks, not their current revenue, their future revenue. And when you're priced for perfection,
You can't afford imperfection. Got it.
right?
Let me ask you something that maybe has an obvious answer, but I genuinely don't know. Why Marvell specifically? What does Marvell bring that, say, Broadcom doesn't?
That's actually not an obvious answer at all. Broadcom and Marvell are the two big custom ASIC players. Broadcom's been closely associated with Google's TPU development. They've manufactured several generations of TPU chips. So the fact that Google is going to Marvell for this inference chip, not Broadcom, is itself a signal.
A signal of what?
Could be a few things. Maybe Google wants diversification, don't want to be dependent on one supplier for all their custom silicon. Maybe Marvell offered better terms or had more available design capacity. Or maybe, and this is speculative, Marvell has specific IP or design expertise in the kind of architecture Google wants for inference that Broadcom doesn't.
That's interesting. So even in the custom chip space, there's specialization.
Layers and layers of specialization. And that's why this market is so hard to break into. Marvell and Broadcom have decades of ASIC design experience. They have relationships with TSMC for manufacturing. They have the IP libraries. It's not just about designing a chip, it's about the whole ecosystem around getting it built and deployed.
Okay, so we've been mostly talking about what this means for Nvidia and Google. What about Marvel? Like, if I'm Marvel, this is.
This is the best thing that could happen to them. Look, Marvell's been trying to position itself as the go-to custom AI silicon partner. They've talked about it on earnings calls endlessly. Landing Google for a major custom inference chip program would validate that entire strategy.
And the stock?
The stock has been beaten up because of broader semiconductor sentiment and some softness in their non-AI businesses. A Google deal would be a massive catalyst. But, and this is important, custom chip deals are lumpy. The revenue doesn't flow smoothly. You get a big design win, then years of development with limited revenue and a ramp. Investors need to be patient, which, let's be honest, they're terrible at.
Patience and the stock market. Name a worse combination.
There isn't one.
Alright, let me try to land this. The way I see it, Google going to Marvel for inference chips isn't about one chip or one deal. It's about the entire AI compute market bifurcating. Training stays with Nvidia, inference goes custom, and that split changes everything about how we think about the semiconductor industry for the next decade.
I'd push back on one thing. Training doesn't necessarily stay with Nvidia forever either. Google trains on TPUs already. Amazon's Trainium is getting better. But the timeline for displacing Nvidia in training is much longer, 5 to 10 years. For inference, it's happening now. That's the urgency here.
And nobody's really pricing that in.
Some people are. Nvidia stock isn't where it was at the peak, but the market is still treating inference as Nvidia's birthright. This Google Marvel story is the latest piece of evidence that it's not, and the evidence keeps accumulating.
So you said earlier that you think this is both a valuation story and a technology story. If you had to pick one,
Technology. Always technology. The valuations follow. If custom inference silicon is genuinely 20, 30, 40% more efficient, which is the whole thesis, then the economics are irresistible at hyperscaler scale. The market will figure it out eventually.
eventually, which is Wall Street's least favorite word.
Right behind patient.
That's where we'll leave it.